Dear Eytan, dear Ruth, Gerlinde, Hans-Werner, all colleagues who are here, it's a great pleasure for me to introduce, as you heard, also partly in my capacity as a member of the board of the IIPF, to introduce this year's Richard Musgrave lecturer. Now, first a few remarks on his life. Eytan Sheshinski was born and raised in Israel, but as we have just heard, he has German roots. He studied at the Hebrew University in Jerusalem, where he received both his bachelor's degree and his master's degree, the later in 1963. And I apologize for any factual errors I do, because that obviously was shortly before I was personally born. He moved on to the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, where he earned his doctorate in 1966. Well, based on the title of his PhD project, which was Essays on the Theory of Production and Technical Change, it would have been hard to predict his future eminent role in public finance. The PhD topic was obviously much influenced by the Cambridge controversy, and two of the official PhD advisors of Eytan Sheshinski, namely Paul Samuelson and Robert Solow, were main proponents in this controversy. In the following years, Eytan published the most impressive list of papers that contributed to the capital controversy and to the economic growth literature. Until 1970, his papers appeared in the best journals of the field, like Econometrica, the American Economic Review, Journal of Political Economy, and alone 5 of his papers were published in the Quarterly Journal of Economics. But then something happened, and actually I asked him personally, how come that you changed? So I have some insider information. It was from 1970 onwards that with the big questions in growth and capital theory at that time, at least at that time having been addressed, we know growth of course came back with endogenous growth models later on. But with at least the controversy, the Cambridge controversy, leveling out, Eytan decided to move on. And together with a group of researchers from the MIT, including Joe Stiglitz and George Akerlof, he decided that public finance theory, built on the work by Richard Musgrave and Arnold Harberger, could benefit from a rigorous application of second-best theory. The role model there was international trade, where Murray Camp and Ronald Jones had started to do a similar approach in the area of international trade. Since then, this research plan has proved extremely fruitful, and Professor Sheshinski has produced an incredible amount of high-profile contributions to the literature of public finance. And let me name a few specific areas, and this must reflect my own preferences here, because the true portfolio of work he has to offer is obviously much larger than I can do here in something like 10 minutes. So very early, and very much in the spirit of applying second-best approaches to public finance, Professor Sheshinski was concerned about the shape of the optimal income tax. Among other things, he was emphasizing that the desirable level of progressivity may sharply increase if individuals have preferences over their relative standing in the society rather than only about their absolute level of income. Another paper I would like to mention is a very short one. His 1972 chat paper clarified nicely the relationship between the Gini coefficient and the social welfare function approach, and very nicely relates to a paper 2 years earlier by Tony Atkinson. Professor Sheshinski has also widely contributed in the area of urban congestion and was thinking about the optimal city size also. I don't know whether that has been reflected in actual policy by mayors, but maybe it should have. And the area where I found as a PhD student very interesting papers, and where I was interested in, was his influential papers on the interplay between taxes, inflation, the interest rate, firms' capital structure, and their cost of capital. And it's a bit intriguing. So the only thing I want to convey here is that this is really a complicated area, and sometimes the interplay of taxes and inflation produces quite some amazing and counterintuitive results. His 1983 contribution on the taxation of married couples is probably the most cited paper on the tax treatment of couples. In this paper, together with Michael Boskin, he emphasizes that identical marginal tax rates, as they derive under income splitting, the tax system we currently have in place, for example, in Germany, are suboptimal. And why is that? Because they are suboptimal if labor supply elasticities between men and women differ, and empirically that's the case. In the last years, Professor Sheshinski has extensively studied pensions and annuities. One of his interests in this area is, for example, the optimal mix between funded and unfunded pension systems, which is certainly of paramount policy interest. And with the currently very low interest rates of the funded system, this is something that will gain certainly more interest in the coming years. I think there will be a backlash in favor of unfunded systems. The scrutiny with which Professor Sheshinski is working can perhaps best be seen by looking at the layout of his recent book on the economic theory of annuities. Over a range of 16 chapters, this book starts out from the simplest cases and covers a most impressive array of problems and complications before then policy conclusions are drawn. Richard Musgrave, in the preface of his famous Theory of Public Finance, wrote that he always enjoyed the direct association with the practice of public finance and policymakers. In his own words, rather than weakening my interest in theoretical questions, this proved invaluable in finding worthwhile questions to ask. Perhaps even more than Richard Musgrave, Professor Sheshinski is a scholar with ample experience in the real world. Between 1990 and 1995, Sheshinski was chairman of the board of directors of Kur Industries Limited, Israel, the largest conglomerate firm in Israel with branches and affiliates in chemical and in arms industry and a lot of other sectors. Often it is that academics are called onto boards of companies when there is a belief that they will do little harm or may hardly be able to change things. Now, this was quite different in his case. When he entered the board in 1990, this was in the middle of a major restructuring after the company was near bankruptcy in 1988 and 1989. Within a couple of years, Eytan Sheshinski helped turning it around and bringing the shares to the New York Stock Exchange. And within a few years, Kur Industries became one of the most profitable enterprises in Israel. So the time at Kur Industries certainly was a major experience, I guess. It seems to have shifted Professor Sheshinski's interests towards privatization policies, as I've learned only from preparing for this. At that time, a lot of the industry in Israel was actually owned by the trade unions. So trade unions negotiated with themselves as representatives of the workers and the representatives of the owners. And then there was this experience from restructuring. I think this has shifted interests towards privatization policies, and over the years he has served as an economic consultant in many countries, including Israel, Bolivia, and Romania. A classical joke is that Moses led the people of Israel through the desert for 40 years, just to end up in the only place in the Middle East without oil. Now, recently things have changed a bit. At least there was a considerable find of natural gas in the Mediterranean near Haifa. I have to admit that I could not infer why the gas field is called Leviathan. In any case, Eytan Sheshinski's work was highly influential to secure a larger share of the rent from these natural gas findings for the Israeli government. He was appointed head of a commission that put forward a new tax law for natural resource extracting companies, implying a higher taxation of extraction rents. The so-called Sheshinski law was accepted in the Knesset with only, according to my information, only 2 dissenting votes. A major achievement indeed. The Knesset is a very fractionalized body, as I understand. After these remarks on the extensive appointments outside the ivory tower, I should of course also emphasize Professor Sheshinski's many academic appointments. While always keeping his ties to Israel and to the Hebrew University of Jerusalem, he has had a host of visiting positions including Berkeley, Harvard, Stanford, Princeton, MIT, Columbia, and most recently Brown University. As Eytan Sheshinski himself once joked, you could have the suspicion, by glancing at that list, that any of those places couldn't stand him for a long while. Well, I remember Eytan Sheshinski from his time as a guest professor here at CES, and I can definitely confirm that such a suspicion would be grossly misplaced. He has certainly a good sense of humor, an easygoing and warm personality, and he is a wonderful speaker and teacher. I can therefore promise a most exciting and entertaining lecture by this year's Richard Musgrave lecture. And you will definitely find that it was good that nobody restricted your choice by preventing you from coming to this event. But after the music, we may learn from Professor Sheshinski about better cases for restricted choice sets.